Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're putting on our safety auditor hats to dissect the incredibly tragic January 2015 sinking of the cement carrier Cemfjord. Now, we aren't just going to look at the storm that took this vessel down. No, we are going to peel back the layers of organizational failure, paper compliance, and frankly, operational deviance that doomed this ship and its 8 crew members before it ever even untied its mooring lines. As any auditor will tell you, disasters almost never happen because of one single error. They happen when multiple critical layers of defense fail all at the same time.
Here is our roadmap for the assessment today. We're going to methodically work through 1. The sinking in Pentland Firth, 2. Compromised stability before departure, 3. Flawed passage planning decisions, 4. The master's fatal dilemma, and finally, 5. Systemic management oversight failures.
All right, let's jump right into part 1, the sinking and the Pentland Firth and the environmental trap they found themselves in.
You know, it is incredibly tempting to just point at a massive storm and say, well, there's your problem. But actually, scratch that. We have to look way past the immediate trigger. We have to recognize this as a pervasive, deep-rooted failure of safety culture. Just as the investigation highlighted, this was a catastrophic engineering-type failure. The crew and the management fundamentally lacked the correct knowledge of the vessel's true stability characteristics when loaded with cement in severe beam seas.
The conditions they sailed into were an absolute nightmare. The vessel's AIS track shows the Cemfjord entering the outer sound against gale force winds. We're talking 40 to 56 knots, blowing from the west. And directly opposing those winds, a massive 6-knot tidal stream flowing in the exact opposite direction. When you have gale force winds smashing directly into a strong tidal stream, it literally stacks the water up. This creates these extraordinarily violent, confused beam seas, which basically means steep, mountainous waves were crashing right into the broadside of the ship. The ship simply could not survive these predictable yet totally fatal conditions.
Moving on to part 2, compromised stability before departure, the loading failures.
The reality is, this disaster was actually set in motion days earlier. The vessel arrived early in Roerdale, Denmark on December 30th. But instead of a nice, smooth process, loading the 2084 tons of bulk cement was intermittent and deeply troubled. They ended up departing 5 hours late. And listen, from an auditor's perspective, unexplained delays in a totally routine operational procedure, that's an immediate red flag. It forces us to ask, what exactly went wrong at the berth?
Well, on paper, procedures and international codes explicitly dictate that a bulk cement carrier must be kept totally upright during loading. You have to avoid any list above 2 degrees. Why? Because cement settles unevenly. If it solidifies on an angle, your ship is permanently unbalanced. But the operational reality was completely different. A failure of the port ballast pump caused the Cemfjord to take on a severe 5-degree list during the continuous cement pour. Again, thinking as an auditor, a 5-degree list is a massive warning sign. This very likely resulted in an uneven cargo distribution that completely compromised the ship's foundational stability before it ever left port.
So, faced with this mechanical failure, what did they do? The crew actually resorted to manually wrestling with diverter flaps, which are essentially these large mechanical chutes, just to direct the heavy flow of powdered cement and try to physically balance the ship. It was a chaotic, ad hoc fix to a serious mechanical failure. Plus, there was absolutely no rigorous stability calculation recorded on board prior to departure. It really points to a culture where just loading to the draft marks had replaced genuine mathematical safety checks. Okay, part 3, flawed passage planning decisions. Let's look at the route and weather deficiencies. The master absolutely had options here. The primary route via the treacherous Pentland Firth was 981 nautical miles, but there was a safer, sure slightly longer, alternative route of 1,187 nautical miles down through the English Channel. Or, even simpler, he could have just altered course slightly south, tucked into Sinclair's Bay, and waited for the storm to blow over. Yet, despite severe weather warnings, he chose to press right into the Firth. Proper passage planning means assessing all your hazards, and here, predictable, known environmental hazards were either vastly underestimated or completely ignored. And the isolation of the Cemfjord's decision is just staggering. While other professional mariners were actively avoiding the area, the ferry Pentalina canceled its scheduled sailings, the ferry Hrossi delayed its departure, and literally no other commercial vessels attempted that transit, the Cemfjord pushed forward all alone. The official sailing directions explicitly warned small coasters not to attempt a westbound passage when a west-going tide is opposed by strong westerly winds. Pushing through anyway was a blatant disregard of established maritime wisdom.
Which brings us to part 4, the master's fatal dilemma. The human factors and trauma at play.
So we really have to ask ourselves, why? Why would a highly experienced master, facing clearly untenable environmental conditions that every single other vessel in the region was avoiding, refuse to turn the ship around or alter course to safety? This is the core behavioral mystery of our audit.
The root cause actually lies in some really important recent context. Earlier in 2014, this same master had successfully aborted approaches to the Pentland Firth 3 separate times when the weather got bad. So he was clearly capable of making the safe call. But then, on October 7th, just a few months prior, he attempted to turn the ship to avoid the Firth and heavy seas, and it resulted in a terrifying cement cargo shift. It deeply, deeply traumatized the crew. So on January 2nd, he finds himself in a fatal dilemma. He knows the conditions ahead are terrible, but he's absolutely terrified that if he makes a large course alteration across those violent beam seas, his cargo is going to shift again and capsize the ship. So instead of turning, he just incrementally reduces speed and makes these tiny adjustments, eventually losing steerage entirely, leaving the ship completely at the mercy of the breaking waves.
Finally, Part 5, Systemic Management Oversight Failures and the Normalization of Deviance.
When we look at the documentation, it reveals a highly dangerous culture of paper compliance. The Cemfjord was sailing with massive safety defects. Back in December, the Cyprus flag state actually issued exemptions allowing the ship to operate without a functioning starboard lifeboat and, incredibly, without a functioning bilge suction system in its void spaces. Management applied for these exemptions just to keep the ship on its commercial schedule rather than actually fixing the critical safety equipment. This lack of communication and technical oversight between the flag state, the management, and the vessel normalizes operational deviance. It sends a loud and clear message to the crew. Commercial schedules matter more than your core survival systems.
And to make matters worse, the total lack of active voyage tracking hindered any chance of an early rescue. The local Pentland Firth reporting scheme was totally voluntary and inexplicably didn't require exit reports from vessels transmitting an AIS signal. So when the Cemfjord capsized so rapidly that they couldn't even make a distress call, its AIS signal just vanished. But because no exit report was ever expected, the Coast Guard had no idea there was even an emergency. The vessel floated upside down for nearly 34 hours before a passing ferry finally spotted the hull. The crew was completely isolated by a systemic failure in marine traffic monitoring.
As we wrap up this explainer, we are left with a massive, vital question. When management prioritizes regulatory exemptions over physical repairs, and when crews are forced to prioritize the schedule over foundational stability, can paper compliance ever truly replace a genuine, risk-aware safety culture? The tragic loss of the Cemfjord tells us the answer is absolutely no. Safety is not a checklist. It's a constant, proactive engagement with reality. So ask yourself, in your own organization, are you actively managing real-world risks, or are you just filing away exemptions and crossing your fingers?